Alright, what's up guys, Fuffin here, and I have a little bit of a different video today. So I'm going to be talking about all the items in TFT, and also, just sort of where I try and like rank them on a tier list. So this is a little bit confusing. I know it looks like a lot, but I'll try to break everything down. So in essence, this is going to be going over, I guess I can go over all the components first. They're kind of mangled up in this. But in essence, the way that I've ranked this tier list is just sort of the flexibility in the items and sort of what it can do for you in the current meta. So, what I really think is important when it comes to items is flexibility and viability, right? And so I'm mostly ignoring like stats. I know when I originally made this tier list, Static Shiv was one of the most broken items. But as you can tell, have it in C tier. So this isn't really going to be stat checking. It's mostly going to be just talking about like why items are good and why items are bad. So yeah, without further ado, we'll get into things. So I'll start breaking down the components first. Basically, S tier is going to be like if you have the item, you're usually always going to slam it anyway. A tier is going to be like really, really valuable. B tier is going to be like super valuable, but kind of niche. And then like C tier is like, really niche and then can be good. And then D and F are just like, if you have to make them, then you have to make them. So basically, to start out with, the three components I think are the most viable are sword, vest, and glove. So my reasoning for this is that sword can be pretty flexible and it makes the two S tier items. In addition, I think that there's a big viability for Deathblade. And Deathblade can be incredibly good to scale with, and it's kind of the same boat as Infinity Edge, right? They're both pretty strong, and sword, I mean, like, you get a bunch of swords, and you'll usually find a place for them. Sword can build a lot of items, and I think that it can be really viable. And like I said, if you get two of them, Deathblade is really, really decent. And there's not actually like a lot of items that you can slam two of themselves and then end up in A or B tier. As you'll notice, there's, I believe, only three examples. So, yeah. And then you have Chain Vest. Chain Vest, on the other hand, is the most viable flex item, I think, still in the game. And this is because of the viability of the early game items, Bramble Vest and Sunfire Cape, in addition to also Guardian Angel. And this is just because Vest can build these items, and I mean even Titans to some extent. You can get this, and then it allows you to eliminate, uh, a whatever you call this, belt for Sunfire, or if you happen to hit a sword, you can make GA. And it also because bow is kind of iffy. Um, you know, it really lets you have a lot of options here. So that's just the idea for that. So Crit Glove is really, really strong with a lot of items. So as you may notice, Hand of Justice, Thieves Gloves, Jeweled Gauntlet, Infinity Edge Trap Claw, there's a lot of things here that uses Crit Glove. So it can be really, really good. The only problem with Crit Glove is that if you start it early, it can cause some problems for you, but I can get to that a little bit later. Zeke's, actually, we'll keep going with the components here. So, bow is B tier, and you could even argue that it should be in C tier. Bow is really niche, in a lot of things, but I think that a lot of champions can use things like Rage Blade. And I think that Z0 Out Portal isn't bad either, at least for the early game. It's not as good as Sunfire, but it's not the worst thing to have, and it's good and all. But once you start getting too many of them, that's where you really begin to run into problems. So as a component, it's B. Could really, really argue for it to be C tier, but I think that there's enough things you can build with it now that it doesn't usually feel bad. And making RFC right now in the meta is pretty fine, which is the only reason this is where it is. Tier, easy C pick. Tier just kind of opens up a lot of kind of mid-tier items in a lot of builds. but I mean, it also allows you access to Hand of Justice, which I think is one of the best items, Chalice, and Ludens. These are really, really strong early, and they can do a lot for you. Specifically, I would say Chalice is hugely underrated by a lot of players because it allows you to get rid of a Negatron Cloak, which is an F tier item. So you can get a C tier and a F tier component. You know, you can drop this for an A tier item, right? And so that's generally, you know, good. And then, you know, like I said, tier's a C tier item, but it can build 2 A tier items, and it can also let you get rid of a glove if you want. There are some things that like aren't very viable with it, but I think we mentioned that, you know, if you made a Frozen Heart, you're using up a Vest, and Vest has a lot of flexibility. So if you're in that situation, just don't make the Frozen Heart and use the Vest for something else. So yeah, and then we have Rod. Rod is really, really niche, and it doesn't have the flexibility of tier at the moment. So it really feels bad to get too many rods unless you have something like a mage build. And honestly, that's it. I can't think of another build that actually uses a lot of rods, especially because, as you can tell from my personal list here, Jeweled Gauntlet is on a higher end than Deathcap, and I'll explain that when I get to the items. But, you know, it doesn't do a lot for you. The only thing saving Rod from F tier is the fact that it can make Ludens early, and you can make Ionic Spark, and that's really just about it. And you can even make a case for Locket, but, you know, Locket still involves an A tier component, so there's less value there. And then we have Belt. So Belt is D tier for the same reason that Rod is. The fact that you can make an A tier Zephyr item, and you can also make Zeeks. But besides that, I mean, Belt is kind of bad. I mean, you can make the case for the Sunfire, and I think that Morello has kind of fallen out of the meta. Sunfire and Morello will be very good in the upcoming 4.5 update, but we don't have the information on items, so we'll address that when we can. And F tier is Cloak. I don't think anybody ever pursues a Cloak. The only reason that you ever do is because you have something like a Belt, and you just want to, you know, basically get rid of 2 shit tier items for, you know, a good tier item. You know, or, you know, like, you don't ever want Cloaks, right? There's plenty of things that you can use to get rid of it, and once you find a Cloak, you're usually just looking to slam an item to get the component some sort of value, because as a component itself, it just has no value, right? So that'll do it for the actual components. We'll go to items. We'll start from the bottom, okay? So F tier is Frozen Heart. Frozen Heart is absolutely awful because, as we mentioned, tier can be used for a bunch of different items, and so can Vest. So if you use 2 relatively high tier items, you don't get a lot of value. In addition to that, you can actually activate the Adept trait and get a lot more value, because what Frozen Heart does is it gives you it gives like everything surrounding the unit that's holding it attack speed slow. But there's the trait Adept that'll do that to every champion on the enemy field for a number of seconds. And it's really easy to activate. It's a 2 trait, and I think that most teams run it right now. At least with Irelia and Shen, if not Shen plus Yone at the end of the game. So that's why it gets an F tier. I think it's just not a good combination of items. I think it was way better last set, but this set, it's kind of just not been viable at all. Same thing goes for Warmogs. So Warmogs is an okay slam if you end up getting way too many belts, but the issues come from 2 main factors. One, the fact that you could use your Warmogs to make things like Zezirot, Zeeks, and then, you know, something like Sunfire. So these aren't awful things, especially if you're not running like an AD comp and don't need swords. You can just, you know, make a Zeeks, or if you have an extra Vest, you can make Sunfire as like a really good up. And then again, if you don't have attack speed comps, you can make a really good tank item. So Belt does have a place, but getting stuck with too many is already kind of a game ender. And those are just a couple of things. I mean, there's obviously Zephyr as well. So you could make Zephyr plus Zezirot instead of Warmogs, and then effectively get rid of, an F tier item, and, maybe you're not running anything that can use the attack speed. The other thing, the second factor, is the fact that Warmogs does nothing for you except for allows you to be Giant Slayered. So we'll get into that when we actually get to the S tier items, but Giant Slayer will just eat you alive and basically makes Warmogs completely fucking useless. So D tier, Runons. Runons has a lot of viability. Again, anything that can get rid of a cloak has its value. But the problem is that once you slam a Runons, you have to play something with it. Runons, you slam it and you have to play like Warwick or something that can actually have value, like Zed. So it really is bad. The only thing that's saving it from F tier is the fact that you can use up items that a lot of builds may not be trying to, use, and you get a relatively decent item out of it. Last Whisper, right now Vanguards aren't really too popular, so that's kind of the only reason this is down here, and I mean, in the future it might be more popular, but I mean, right now every team has magic damage, so that's just, I guess, what I have to say on this. Deathcap, this is mostly just a stat check. Deathcap can be really strong, but I think people are more privy to things like Gunblade or Hand of Justice or Jeweled Gauntlet, especially because these three items have two separate components, and people usually never pursue a Deathcap. I think that Rod has a lot, like, way lower value, and it's a lot less flexible. When you grab a Rod, you have way fewer options in the higher tiers than if you were to grab something like a Tear or a Crit Glove, which is used in, a couple of these. So that's the main thing with that. And then also the fact that if you do get a Rod, you usually want to make things outside of it again that, might have more value. So I guess that's about that. So Stoneplate. Stoneplate I don't actually hate as a slam. I just, again, it's sort of the same thing with Frozen Heart. I don't like using up vests for things that don't have a lot of value. If you can get rid of a cloak, cool, but it's a little bit not as efficient, I guess. C tier, we have a Gunblade. Gunblade is a very nice item for those who can use it, but once you make it, it's sort of the same deal as Runons. You are kind of locked into some form of comp, or at least trying to win streak with it. And I think that the healing is kind of overrated on everything but Vigar. And I think that you can kind of make a statement that, like, Hand of Justice is a little bit of a better item because, like, if you roll the damage, it does more. And if you roll the healing, it can compare. But yeah. C tier, Spear of Shojin. This is more of like, this could possibly have been in D tier, and looking at it now, I think it might should actually belong in D tier, but it has its place when it can be used. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, if you slam the Spear of Shojin, it doesn't feel bad. If you slam any of the D tier items, it does feel bad. Especially if you're running something like mages, this can be a really good slam. The mana gain is really great, and like late game, anybody ranged, this can be really good with. It lets you gain mana, but it's not too significant. But it's not something I absolutely hate. It's just something that, like, if I make it at the end of the game, I'll find someone for it. It just doesn't particularly feel good to do. Bloodthirster. This is kind of like, again, this is a weird one. But the only thing saving this from D tier is the fact that it lets you use up a Negatron Cloak. And if you have anything AD, this can be really, really huge. But if you get, Grievous Wounds, you'll end up having problems with it. There's not much to say about that. Rapid Fire Cannon, same thing as Runons and Gunblade. You make it, and then you get stuck. If you do make it, there's a lot of champions that can hold it, and it'll be, like, really fine. So you can make, like, Akali, Zed, Warwick. So it doesn't really feel too bad, and I think that if you get too many bows, it can be an issue, but slamming this is way better than slamming, like, a Deathcap, for example. Static Shiv. This one's iffy. I don't hate it. I just think that it's less effective now, but I mean, against things like Keeper, it can absolutely shred them apart. There's just not a lot of things that use it effectively at the moment, so it gets a comfortable C tier. Not something I like making at all, but if I have one, I'll find a place for it. Xerath Portal. So this is the only one that could be a possible contender for B tier, but the only thing that's stopping it from being a B tier is the fact that it's like it's slammable and everything, but it just doesn't feel good a lot of the time. Most of the time, you're just doing it to use up a belt, and it can be good, but I feel like there's a lot of better items that overshadow it, and at the end of the game, usually it becomes a little bit of a burden. You don't really want to put it on anybody that you can't get the effective from the taunt. So that's why it gets a C tier. It very quickly can become a dead weight on your team, especially when you have to use up 2 of your components for it and don't just like get it off of a carousel. Luden's Echo. This is sort of in the same tier as Xerath. When you make a Luden's Echo, it's to scale early, right? Because Luden's Echo fucking sucks late game. So if you have like mages, Luden's Echo can be really good to attempt to win streak, but at the end of the game, just like Xerath Portal, it can start to look like a little bit of a dead weight on your team. Blue buff, I have a bias for, but I think that there's a lot of champions that people don't really know a lot about, and I think that people are not really willing to learn what blue buff can do. And so, I mean, right now we have the Veigar build that's been pretty popular, right? Veigar, Kindred, Teemo, all of these champions can spam abilities nonstop, and blue buff can be absolutely great for it. Yumi's another huge one. So I think that blue buff is really, really underrated, and if you slam it, it doesn't really feel bad. At least it doesn't for me, but that's because I kind of cater to that playstyle. And, you know, I think that more people should try it out, honestly. As of my last couple of months, I've been rushing tiers every game and trying to build blue buff, and I got to masters with the strategy, so you know how that goes. Redemption. Redemption is C tier. It lets you use up a belt, and if you don't want tiers, it can use that up too. It has a lot of value if you put it on the right thing, which is usually like either a frontliner or a sack unit in your back line that can utilize the mana. Things like Teemo, Yumi. It lets you have value for something that dies, and if you have bad luck like me, this is probably S tier, maybe even S plus tier as the best defensive item in the game, because whenever I have redemption on something, it doesn't die. So, yeah, we're just gonna go with that. Dragon's Claw, the only thing saving it from D or F tier is the fact that you use up 2 cloaks, and when you have this on something, it can be really fucking good, but if not, then you're kind of like shit out of luck. If you get stuck with 2 cloaks, you always slam this to get rid of your 2 cloaks to get like a minor salvageable item in C tier. But the issue comes from the fact that you have now used up 2 of your components and have 2 cloaks, and at that point you're already in a less favorable spot. Shroud, the only reason this is in C tier and not in B or A is because it uses up 2 A tier components, and I don't think it has a lot of value. If you pick this up at the end of the game off of a carousel and have not used your own components for it, I think that this is an easy contender for B, and a very, like, you can make a case even for A, because Shroud has so much value late game, but it's just one of those things that you really don't want to have in the early game. Moving on to B tier. Deathblade. I think Deathblade's pretty self-explanatory. It's a snowball win harder item. You run anybody who is using this effectively, and by the time the fight is about halfway over, they're going to be one-shotting things. Especially if you have traits that give you bonus autos like Hunter, or bonus autos through something like Spirit. Or not Spirit. Well, yes, technically Spirit, Hunter, and I had another one in mind, but I think I forgot it. But yeah, no. So you have a lot of things here that can work for Deathblade, and I think there's a lot of good holders for Deathblade. And you know, again, if you need to use up some swords, it doesn't feel bad to do usually, because there's so many people who can effectively use the item. Infinity Edge. Infinity Edge is also B tier because it can go with the Jeweled Gauntlet combo, meaning that these two will bounce off each other's crit, and then they will basically be able to be used in mages. And I just think that that's pretty fine, honestly. And I don't absolutely hate hitting the Infinity Edge if it's for AD, or if you hit the Jeweled Gauntlet plus Infinity Edge at the end of the game. You know, it's fine. And plus, Infinity Edge in this patch can be used with Assassins, meaning that it will actually allow you to like have value somewhere else along the lines. The same concept for you know, the Infinity Edge plus the Jeweled Gauntlet. But anyway, next onto Rageblade. So Rageblade is only here because you can use two kind of shitty items that if you get stuck with, you can make it into something. And with the same thing as Deathblade, you actually have a lot of item holders for it. And I don't think that that's the worst thing ever, right? So Titan's Resolve. Titan's Resolve is really, really strong once it, like, this is kind of a feast or famine item. If you pop that 25 mark, you are going to absolutely roll the lobby. But if you take too long for it, well, you'll probably just die right after hitting 25 or right before hitting 25. And that can be really, really bad. But you combine this with a healing item, and you're going to be in a really good spot, honestly. This is why Titan's Resolve plus Hand of Justice Yasuo is a really good thing to win early in the game, even if you don't make him level 3. Ionic Spark. Ionic Spark is only here because it has a lot of value in any AP comp, in addition to it doing damage and, you know, shredding tanks. You know, it basically works as a Last Whisper, and also a Bramble Vest or Sunfire. And the fact that it also uses a D and an F tier component. Like, that's a ton of things. Almost always I slam Ionic Spark if I have the components. And I think that it's a pretty underrated item that I'm not seeing a lot. Morello. Morello, I mean, it's healing reduction. You put it on anyone with AoE, and you can get a ridiculous amount of value from it. I don't think a lot of people need an explanation on this. Jeweled Gauntlet, mix your spells crit. Again, you can combine it with Infinity Edge, and you can have a ton of fun with it. You can double Jeweled Gauntlet, and if you put it on anyone who spams, you are going to have a very fun time. Again, it also gets rid of Rod. Bramble Vest. Bramble Vest reduces all crit. So that whole Infinity Edge Jeweled Gauntlet nonsense I was talking about, yeah, that's not going to happen. There's going to be none of that there, and, you know, it will completely nullify all crits, meaning that if you run it on Riven, you can have a field day against anybody using Infinity Edge, and I think that that brings it a lot of value. The only issue dragging it, like, it's probably low B tier. You could make a case for C tier, but, you know, the only thing dragging it down is the fact that you use two chain vests. But if you are in a situation where you have too many chain vests, it's definitely bad, not bad to slam, and that's why I put it in comfortable B tier. And we have Sunfire Cape. So Sunfire Cape is, again, in the same boat that the Zz'Rot and Ludens are in. You make it early, and then it starts to feel bad late. But the difference with Sunfire is that it can absolutely solo win you the early game. If you hit, again, gets rid of a belt. If you happen to start with Vest, and then you get belt, it makes the situation not too bad. You get any other component with it, and you really can already have a direction to go. If you have any of these items, you already have a pretty clear direction on what you want to do. It can easily get you, like, Sunfire Cape plus Infinity Edge or Guardian Angel, and there's really a lot of flexibility with it, and again, it uses up bad components. Quicksilver. The only reason Quicksilver isn't higher on the list is because it has a very low value early game. This is something I'll talk about with Giant Slayer as well, but there's the opposite of the whole these three effect, right? Where it's really strong early and then it falls off. Well, Quicksilver has almost no value early because there's not a lot of crowd control early. The main thing would be like Nami is like the only real thing I can think of, and sometimes Nami won't even build her mana fast enough to get any value out of the Quicksilver. So, you know, it's just kind of that. And I mean, Trap Claw's in the same boat. The only difference is that Trap Claw can actually be used as a counter because it'll stun the opponent, and also, you know, it uses up a bad item. But the only issue with it is that you run into people being able to bait it out. It can also be Zephyred. And if anyone is running a Quicksilver, then it pretty much nullifies your Trap Claw if they hit it because it will not stun them. Moving on to A tier, we have Zeke's. So Zeke's, as you'll notice with these three, they're all AoE value items, and they all also kind of use up a bad item as well. Zeke's uses up this, Locket uses up this, and then Chalice uses up this. So they all basically fall into the same category of giving huge stat bonuses to 3 champions. So, Locket can give you the equivalent of like Keeper Shields to 5 people. Zeke's can give you the equivalent of, I think, a bow and a half. And Chalice can give you almost the same, I believe, as Deathcap in terms of AP. And that's the thing, too. They are items that don't contain the components, but will give you stats of other things. For example, Chalice is Tear, which gives you mana, and Negatron Cloak, which gives you magic resist, but can provide ability power to 3 people. So the flexibility of those items is really crazy, and the value that they have is equally as crazy. So moving on to Hand of Justice. Hand of Justice is basically like, I think this is, if you have the 2 components for it, you always slam it, because there's so many people who can use it, and it can be an absolutely insane item on a lot of people. Hand of Justice doesn't need a lot of talk about it. Just if you can make it, you probably should just make it. Zephyr. Zephyr is a great late game item, but the difference between it or something like Shroud is the fact that, first off, it uses 2 very poor components to make a high value A tier item, and the fact that it can be used to basically completely win fights. If your opponent doesn't have a QSS, if they haven't built this item, you can eliminate their carry almost guaranteed by placing any units with an open item slot where their carry is, and then before the battle starts, before they're able to switch around their units or any of that, or like after they're already locked into the field, you can just click on the unit and then bam, that's called the Zephyr cheese. I don't know if I explained that right, but there we go. Thieves' Gloves. So Thieves' Gloves is very valuable throughout the entire game, and it also lets you get rid of excess crit gloves. Because the problem with crit gloves is if you get too many, it can be a little bit of an issue to try and move them around. But I mean, as we've noted, all 3 of these components have items that are in A tier or B tier that you can slam, which is why it's not bad to have too many of them usually, but the other items kind of fall flat in that sense. And Thieves' Gloves, the only issue with Thieves' Gloves that would put it in either A or B tier is the fact that it is a random item. But if you can put it on a champion that can use it, I mean, you get the equivalent of like an extra component, if not 2, in addition to extra dodge chance, right? So it can have a lot of value there, and the value will only increase throughout the game because the items will actually scale off of your player level. So you can get a lot of value really, really quickly, and then that can be used to transition you to the end of the game. The only thing is you can't use that as a crutch because you are relying on randomness. Now, the S tier. So the first pick here is a little bit controversial, and mostly I think I'm going to put this in S because of stat checking. But Giant Slayer is an absolutely crazy item, if not for the fact that it is absolutely useless early game. If you are not using it for the sword and the bow early game, you do not build this item. You would rather keep your sword and your bow for other items, unless you are 100% doing this. And even then, I wouldn't even suggest making it early, because Giant Slayer doesn't really activate until you hit a health cap of, at the time of making the video, it's like 1700. And there are not things in the game that early that have 17 health, unless you build a Warmogs, which is again why Warmogs is F tier, because basically you turn this item on and this item is absolutely nuts. The reason why it's nuts is because if anyone has hyper rolled into a level 3 unit, Giant Slayer can tear them in half if they hit over that amount. Things like 9 Cultist Galio, which is supposed to be absolutely just monumental, can get 3 or 4, like the 4 shots that Jin puts out can one-shot the Galio at the end there, and it's just a 2-star Jin. So it does a ton of damage, and people have kind of underestimated it. I don't think stacking it's good anymore, but it can absolutely tear through tanks like nothing else. Way better than, even the Infinity Edge Jeweled Gauntlet combo, or not, the Infinity Edge Last Whisper combo, and the fact that, it's pretty easy to make a lot of the times. Usually you're not fighting over the components too late into the game, and I think that it just has a crazy amount of value for what it is. Guardian Angel. Guardian Angel really needs no introduction. It brings something back to life. This counters Talon, this counters so many things, and there's interactions with Guardian Angel and abilities and stuff like that. So really, there's not much to say about it. It's great. And if it stays in set 4.5, this is going to remain in S tier, I believe, until the end of time. You may notice that I don't have these in the tier list, but I do have Force of Nature. Force of Nature, if you can afford to slam it, slam it. But these items really, like, if you have them in your situation, they can be really good. If you happen to get them off of the PvE round or whatever, they can be really bad. So that's, I guess, what I'll leave that at that. Hopefully this explains things. I tried to not make this too long, and hopefully, I mean, it gives you guys a lot of information. But that'll be it. Again, I'm not trying to keep the video long. I've recorded this twice already, and it was an hour and a half long each time. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you guys like the video, please like the video. If it's convenient for you guys, I would always appreciate subscribing. You know, I don't know how it helps you guys, but it helps me out a lot. And with that said, that'll be it. Peace, peace.